All right, let's rock and roll here. How are you today, Zing?
I'm doing excellent. How are you?
I am doing well, doing well. Thanks for joining us today. It is an absolute honor and pleasure to have you with us here today. For those tuning in, this is our third session that we call Let's Talk Leadership. And these sessions are designed to have a candid conversation with members of the 100 or friends of the 100 that are doing amazing things in the community and that are leaders that we can look up to and sort of model ourselves after. We want to make sure that our young people, our scholars, our students, our collegiate 100, and our young professionals have some of these examples that they can check out, listen to, learn about leadership philosophy, leadership styles, great books, how do you deal with difficult conversations, just to help sort of shape their leadership styles and techniques as they navigate their careers. And so today, it is with the greatest pleasure that I have Nzinga with us here. I am going to introduce Zing, and then we are going to get into this discussion on leadership. So thanks everyone for joining us. And as you all know, this is facilitated by the 100 Black Men of Atlanta. All right, Nzinga Zing Shaw is currently the Global Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Starbucks Coffee Company. She leads the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility team and currently serves as a member of the Partner Resources Leadership team. Zing provides strategic guidance across the enterprise to promote inclusive practices in every facet of the business. She has developed a strategy to embed equity in all programmatic activities, governance, and daily administration of the global retail organization. Currently, Zing is helping Starbucks achieve 100% global pay equity by working with experts to develop best practices and tools to address systemic barriers impeding equal pay for equal work. Prior to joining Starbucks, Zing has been at the forefront of leading organizational change through diversity. She was the first person, I repeat that, the first person to hold the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position in the NBA, serving in that capacity for the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena for 5 years. This is living history, folks. She also served as the Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Edelman, the world's largest and most profitable public relations and integrated marketing agency. While leading diversity at Edelman, Zing concurrently served as Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the Southeast and Southwest regions. Throughout her career, Zing has worked as a human resources practitioner across a multitude of industries, including publishing, sports and entertainment, public relations, and retail. Zing is a recipient of several industry awards, including the Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and Game Changers Awards, the Atlanta Business Chronicle's 40 Under 40 and Women Who Mean Business Awards, the National Journal 40 Under 40 and Top 25 Most Influential Black Women in Business Awards, PR Week 40 Under 40, and many others. She was also selected by the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, to serve a 3-year term on the Board of Counselors of the Carter Center. Zing is a graduate of the class of Courage and the Best Class Ever, Leadership Atlanta 2019, class I was in, and currently serves on the Leadership Council for UNCF Seattle. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority and the Links Incorporated. She is an alumna of Spelman College, the University of Pennsylvania, and was a study abroad scholar at Oxford University in the UK. Most importantly, she's the mother to 2.5 babies. She has an incredible husband that's one of our members, Keith Washington. She's my sister, even though we have different mothers and fathers. I know y'all see the resemblance. My friend and an all-around incredible woman, a leader, and a bad mama jamma, Nzinga Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Gooch. I really appreciate the long, warm welcome. I think I asked you not to read all of that, but nevertheless, I'm happy to be here with you and the members of the 100 and also your constituents. I think today's conversation is very important.
I cut out a sentence or two. Well, let's get into it and let's talk a little leadership here. So tell us a little bit about your professional journey, how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, I like to describe my professional journey as a jungle gym. Really, if you look at my resume on paper, none of it makes sense. But The collective journey is certainly a journey that I needed to take in the way that I did in order to achieve certain milestones and also achieve the experiences that I needed to get me to the place where I can now lead inclusion for a global organization that is publicly traded in the Fortune 500 with 400,000 employees and 100 million customers. What I will say about my experience is that I've always realized and recognized that taking the road not taken and taking an untrodden path is likely the best way to gain experiences that the broad population just hasn't been privy to. And those are really going to be the differentiating factors to decide and determine how you get into new spaces, how you are afforded opportunities to do new things. It's because you've been able to differentiate yourself from the pack. And so I started off as a human resources practitioner at Essence Magazine and publishing. But what I decided along my journey is that I wanted to be career agnostic. So there are oftentimes people stick with one career path. They decide that medicine is going to be their path and they become doctors and they go down a medical track. Same thing with law. You know, you go to law school and you go down a legal track. For me, early on, I understood that diversity and inclusion was the one differentiating factor that would take companies from being good to great, but that you really could do the work across industries. Mm-hmm. Early on, I decided that I wanted to be industry agnostic, and I just wanted to be at companies that would afford me the opportunity to do the work in the way that I needed to do it and to get the good experiences, whether it was in-house at a major brand like the National Football League, or whether it was working at an agency like Edelman that afforded me an opportunity to work with many different brands at the same time. I needed those varied experiences to be able to prepare me to be at a place like Starbucks.
Tell us, how was that transition from Edelman to the Hawks in the NBA? How did that happen? And how did that align with your sort of career trajectory?
You know, it's such a great question. I did not plan on leaving Edelman at the time that I did, but I was always ready for new experiences and ready to roll up my sleeves in real time if something ever came about. And so on a random Thursday, I was at work wearing jeans because we did have a very comfortable working environment at Edelman, and the head of the crisis practice asked me if I wanted to come to a meeting at a big law firm in Atlanta, Alston & Bird. He had a meeting with Alston & Bird because they happened to be one of the clients that we represented on the PR side of our business. But they had an opportunity for us because they were doing a legal investigation for a client in the sports space. And they said that the client likely needed more than legal counsel. So not only did they need a legal investigation to take place, but they were likely going to encounter a situation that would be public facing with racial crisis written all over it. And he asked me if I wanted to go to the meeting, and I said, I can't go dressed like this. And he said, well, you know, figure it out. I went downstairs to a boutique, bought a dress within 10 minutes and got myself ready. And we headed over to Alston & Bird. And I will tell you, that day changed the trajectory of my life and my career. We ended up meeting with Steve Koonin and Scott Wilkinson from the Atlanta Hawks, the CEO and the general counsel. And they asked us a lot of questions about our experience with crisis and our experience with race relations. And then they made us sign an NDA and told us that they had a situation brewing that they thought was going to become public, in which their general manager of the team and the controlling owner of the franchise were disparaging the Black community. And disparaging the Black community in very public ways, whether via written email or even at board calls that were audio taped. And so their main concern was that this information was going to become public, and they wanted my counsel with regard to whether or not this was going to remain a secret. Could we make it remain a secret? And if not, how would we manage through it? And at the time, I signed on to become one of their crisis counselors and help the Atlanta Hawks managed through this situation in 2014, which was so interesting because it was 2 months after Donald Sterling and the LA Clippers went through something similar, their franchise. And I remember saying to the client, Steve, at some point that he needed a chief diversity officer and that the NBA should think about implementing this role because there was just a lot of upside for what could come out of having a concerted effort around inclusion work. And there was pushback in the beginning. You know, Steve said, you have a lot of great ideas, generally speaking, but this one isn't such a great idea. We're a basketball team. You know, we don't need diversity and inclusion. And I said, no, sir, on the contrary, you do. Because your franchise is experiencing issues, and you will continue to see this trend, not only at the Hawks, but likely through the NBA, unless you get a hold of what your issues are and then create a strategy plan and a North Star to connect with the community and to connect with your employees in a real way to ensure that the bad players are no longer on the scene, and you really start to lean into this inclusion work. And he ended up agreeing over a period of time that that was the right direction. And I ended up applying for the job and leaving my job at Edelman to be the first chief diversity officer in the NBA. And we had a good run for 5 years. That it was just honestly probably one of the most rewarding professional experiences of my career. But I will say that it was a situation that made me take a huge chance. I mean, I was very comfortable in my role at Edelman and doing well and, winning awards and all of those things. But I felt like I was supposed to be doing something bigger in terms of changing the narrative for an industry and leading an industry to do work that the industry is really being called to do. When you think about the power of the athlete and the power of sports as a platform to unite and unify people, it almost was low-hanging fruit that I had to grab onto and take a chance to be a part of something that I knew could really shape what the narrative is for an entire industry. So I left my comfort zone and I went into the world of the unknown. And looking back, it was the best decision I ever made.
Wow. It's amazing how those single moments can change your entire trajectory in life. I had a similar situation where when the crisis hit in 08, 09, we had a team meeting at my firm, and I was at Alston and Bird at the time, and a deal had just come in, and it just so happened that I was up in the rotation to work on this deal, and this deal kept me busy for 2 years and made sure that I had work to do throughout the entire crisis when everybody else had slowed down. And it was just that moment, if I didn't happen to be in that meeting or if I happened to be tied up, my career could have turned out completely different, because again, that was 2 years worth of work that kept me busy during one of the toughest times in the legal profession. And so for you, being there, being present, and being ready to take that meeting and to show up and be bold and courageous and tell them what they need, and not just, be a part of the meeting, but stand out, change that whole trajectory for you. So that's amazing.
No, it's again, it's one of those situations where you have to rely on your ability to believe in yourself. A lot of times people don't believe in themselves. Or other people will influence them to believe that things are not possible. How many times have we heard from naysayers? Don't do that. You don't know about that. Don't start trying something new. You better continue to get your paycheck and stay comfortable. And I think that type of advice over time can be very dangerous, because what happens is that people end up giving you advice about what they project as their own fears and things that they do not feel like they can accomplish. And so, I don't think that human beings do this out of malintent or out of spite, but I just think they do it out of fear. It's, oftentimes even your parents, people that are in your close circle will say, don't take that thing on. You don't know anything about that. Stay comfortable. And so at some point you have to block out the noise, and you have to really lean into the belief that you can do something different, and that your training has prepared you to be malleable and to be strong enough to weather whatever storm is put in front of you. And that's how I've always approached my life and approached decisions that I make. I rarely will make a life decision based on the sole advice of others. I do think it's important to get advice from others, but ultimately when it comes time to make that decision, I feel like I made it with the best of intention from my own brain and from what I have been called to do internally, so that I feel good about it. So that when I look back, I don't blame Kevin Gooch for giving me advice that could have gone another way if I didn't listen to him. When you have personal accountability, um, then you can always feel good about where you landed.
Yeah, never let others' insecurities stifle your opportunity to grow. I always say that, and you're a testament to that. Tell us, what role did mentors play in your career thus far?
Great question. It's a great question based on the timing. The Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, recently published an article talking to me about my mentor, who has been my greatest mentor, and why that relationship has been so successful. And so I'll always cite the same person in the same situation, although I have had a range of mentors around me for my life. A man named Neil Glatt, who was the president of the New York Jets for about 8 years, is my mentor. He still is my mentor to this day. We met each other when we were both employed at the National Football League. Obviously, he was a lot more senior than me at the time. I was the HR business partner supporting his corporate development practice when he was a senior vice president. But Neil became my mentor organically. I did not ask him to be my mentor. He did not ask to mentor me. But we realized through having some very real conversations about work challenges and about how to go about solving them, we would have good discourse and good dialogue around issues that we didn't necessarily agree on all the time. And for me, that was the best way that I was able to learn and grow and develop, was because he was pushing me to think outside of my comfort zone. It was likely because he and I are so different. Neil is white, I'm Black. Neil is Jewish, I'm Christian. Neil is analytic, I'm creative. I mean, we are truly opposites in every way that you can think of. And that for me has been the best component of our mentor-mentee relationship, is because when I ask Neil questions about problems that I'm trying to solve and think about how to go about solving them, he's giving me the perspective of a white man who has a very analytic, strategy-based mind. And so he will approach a problem naturally differently than my mind will. And that stretches me and pushes me out of a comfort zone and makes me be able to lean into innovation and think about problem solving in ways that just would not come naturally. And so I oftentimes talk to Neil. I mean, our relationship is 13 years strong, and we still talk. We talked last week for a while, as a matter of fact. But I think that what I'm saying is, when people engage in these mentor-mentee relationships, it is so important to cultivate a true dynamic with a person who is not like you, because that's what's going to stretch you and that's what's going to enable growth. So many times you go into organizations, particularly for people like us that are Black people in corporate America, we look for senior level Black people to mentor us. And we think that is the most natural fit and the most natural thing and type of person that we should be looking for. And I'm not saying that it isn't, because I do think there is something very important about having Black role models that are senior around us. And we do need to lean into those type of lessons, basically because of the lived experiences that we will share. But I also think that it's important to keep an open mind and keep people that are very different around us as well, if we want to be well-rounded and be able to play in many spaces and not just a comfortable space. So mentorship has always had it's been a big component of my professional career. I always seek out different types of mentors for different situations. So for instance, Neil cannot be a mentor to me as it relates to teaching me how to be a good mother. So you have to really look at your life in facets and think about the many different ways that you show up. So I'm a mother. I seek out women who have children to mentor me, because that is a lived experience that they are able to provide insight and share anecdotal stories and tell me some of the nuances that they've had to navigate along the way. I probably would not be asking a woman without children how to become a mother or how to lean into motherhood, because it's just not an experience that she's had. So I think when we seek mentors, we need to figure out, well, what facet of our life are we trying to expand? Does this person actually have experience or some level of insight into what I'm trying to gain to help shepherd me down that path? And and then you can make your decision from there. But everybody can't mentor you for everything, is what I'm trying to say.
That's great advice. So tell us a little bit about your sort of daily activities at Starbucks. What does your role entail?
Daily activities. That's an interesting phrase because no day is the same. But what I will say is that my North Star and my guiding light is my IND, my inclusion and diversity strategy, which leads me down three paths. The first is around policy and practice and the employee experience, really thinking about the life cycle of an employee's career, even before they become an employee. Are we going to new and unexpected places to find talent and really differentiate our organization by ensuring that there are different types of people that come in? And then once the folks are here, what are we doing to cultivating a culture of inclusion and equity for all, so that you're not operating an organization that is telling the tale of two cities, where some of the employees happen to have great experiences and can have longevity in the company based on their race or their gender or some type of factor that keeps them closely tethered to the majority, where others who are in the minority are, struggling to find their way and are not feeling good about their experiences. For me, it's how can we create a culture of equity and inclusion for all? And so I think about that a lot. The second thing that I drive towards in my job is really strategy and integration, and figuring out how we can make diversity, equity, and inclusion a part of our holistic business and not an additive function. So it should really be embedded into everything that we do. It should be at the table in most business decisions that are being made, whether it's a new product offering, a new coffee that's going to hit the market, or even our sustainability model and how we think about paper and plastic, and ensuring that we're not only being cognizant of the environment, but cognizant of the people that use those products, and recognizing that people do need plastic in many instances in the disabled community, and every other business decision that has to be made. So, oftentimes in organizations, the way that companies frame up inclusion and diversity is by saying that, oh, we're going to put it to, it's like, we're going to add it to what we do. So, let's have a Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, which is an additive thing, and it's a tactic, but it's not really embedded into the core way that you run your business, that the way that you look at profits and losses, and the way that you are managing your stakeholders and your investors, your customers, the communities that you serve. So that's the second thing that I think I do at work. And then the third thing is that I look very closely at data. I am a data-driven IND practitioner that believes that compliance and analytics is the one missing piece of the secret sauce that holds diversity and inclusion functions holds them back from being successful ultimately, because we're not looking at data properly. When I started at Starbucks, the first thing I asked for was our data. And as I started to look at it, I realized very quickly that we had a huge miss. In terms of demographic representation, every single employee was put into a box called POC, which was people of color. So when I asked questions about, well, in terms of our Black population, how long is it taking before people attrit? Or in terms of our Latino population, what does the progression look like from a barista to an assistant store manager to a store manager? What's the time frame? No one was able to tell me, because everybody was lumped into this one box called POC. And immediately I said, we've got to democratize this data. We've got to break these numbers down, and we've got to start to put people into their own specific boxes, so that this data can enable us to understand cohesively what's happening across the board as it relates to promotion, or even ability to move through the organization for different groups. The Latino journey is very different than the Pan-Asian journey. And the Pan-Asian journey is very different than the Indigenous journey. And we need to know those things, because if we know those things, then it will enable us to create initiatives for each of those groups and partner with the right external organizations to be able to provide them with resources to really be successful along the way in areas that we cannot provide them internal resources. So when I think about my job, those are the three aspects and components of what happens and what I am managing on a global scale to ensure that we are remaining a leader in this space.
Wow. So we know that half of society views diversity as a great thing, and the other half views it as sort of a personal attack on their way of life. How do you sort of thread that needle doing the work that you're doing in the I&D space?
Yeah, well, I would say that starts with education. Anybody that feels attacked by diversity doesn't understand diversity because every single person in the world is diverse. Even white men are diverse. There's 7.3 billion people in this world, which means that there are 7.3 billion differences that are being curated on a daily basis. So if people feel that they're being attacked because of diversity, what they're not understanding is how they actually ladder up to being a part of a diverse story. And so for me, I think education is one of the key components because I understand as I come into an organization that oftentimes, while the company's mission and values are very clear, the company's inclusion and diversity strategy is never clear, or people don't even know how to define what those words mean. And so I also use data to help tell stories about why we're focusing in one area versus another. So what I think you're describing, Kevin, is a situation in which, say, for instance, this summer, there was a lot of rhetoric around Black Lives Matter and social justice issues. And you started to see companies make public statements about leaning into diversity. And there was a sentiment from white counterparts and colleagues that they would be losing something if we started pouring into these communities in a way that we have never poured into them before. But that's when data comes in, and that's when you have to be able to say, and at Starbucks, this is what I did. I looked at the data and said, well, listen, based on the EEO1 report that we have to provide to the EEOC every year, based on these categories with regard to gender and race, the organization is 69% women. So women is not an issue. It's not a problem for us. So it's not going to be a huge focal point for us right now. But what I do see is huge areas for improvement as it relates to BIPOC representation. So when I look at Black, Indigenous, and people of color, inclusive of Latino, Pan-Asian, and multicultural, I'm starting to see that the trajectory of a white person's career can be very fast and be very upward moving in this organization, whereas these people who are in the BIPOC community are moving at a much slower rate of speed. Some of them are not moving at all. And as we move up the chain, the gaps become wider. And so this data is compelling me to now make a recommendation to our executive committee that we need to focus our efforts on the Black and Indigenous populations, the Latino and the Asian populations as a starting point in terms of who we're pouring into, what type of programs that we're developing and implementing, looking at pay equity to ensure that they are being paid fairly and equitably for the same work as their white counterparts, and to ensure that all of our policies and practices are driving towards an equitable workplace. So that for me is how I enable conversations where people feel that diversity is actually dividing us. It's actually different. It's actually enabling us to understand where their systemic issues are and how to address them so that we start to have more parity in the workplace.
We know that tone at the top matters in any organization. Do you anticipate there will be a change at the top of our nation in January, I think? Do you anticipate any shift in sort of your work or the environment that you're working in when that tone at the top shifts?
I mean, absolutely. Especially for a company like mine, we're a federal contractor. A lot of the way that we either do our business externally is dictated by law and by activity happening at the federal level. There absolutely will be a shift in tone. There was an executive order that President Trump put out recently that is forbidding companies that are publicly traded federal contractors to host diversity and inclusion training. He saw it as being divisive and a negative thing. And so obviously the companies band together to say that they were not in agreement with this order, and started to mobilize and put things in place in order to counteract that. But I think with the Biden-Harris administration, I think it's very clear, based on some very quick announcements from the Biden-Harris team, that they are going to be appointing people to very high-end positions in their administration that come from a variety of backgrounds. We just saw one appointee who is a transgender woman. We are seeing a lot of people of color and a lot of women being placed in that administration as well. I do think that that will dictate what happens in corporate organizations, and the way that you start to see leaders either feel pressure to step up to the plate and make sure that their organizations are mirroring what our leadership at the executive level is demanding that we do. But then I also think that you're going to see some pressure from investors and from clients and customers. You know, we have 100 million customers at Starbucks across the globe. And our customers are very vocal with us when it comes to issues that they want to see us champion, particularly around social justice and political issues, and it runs the gamut. And so we'll have to step up to the plate, and we'll have to really be extremely malleable and start to shift in a manner that will be showing progression from the status quo and what the norm has been in a lot of these organizations for centuries, for years, for decades, however long they've been around. The world is changing rapidly. Demographic shifts are evident. The minorities that we've been calling minorities since we were children are no longer going to be minorities. They'll soon be the majority. And we've got to change with the times.
So I applaud you in your work, because I know it takes like persistence and consistency, and it's sort of like changing the direction of the Titanic in some organizations dealing with diversity and inclusion. So what motivates you to deal with that daily grind of fighting those diversity and inclusion challenges? What's sort of your North Star guides you there?
I think being able to impact industries that I know will have long-lasting impact. I don't believe in being busy. I think a lot of people are just busy at work, and they, at the end of the day, 10 years later, 20 years later, you ask them what they have to show for it, and it's not much. For me, I want to have impact, and I want for people to say, oh, that was Zing Shaw who helped change the narrative for what the sports industry was able to do around inclusion. Or, Starbucks is a big machine. She was able to help influence this retail powerhouse to operate differently, which in fact ended up changing the world in many ways. And then I also think, for me, my North Star is my kids. I think every generation wants their kids to do a little bit better than they did, and to be able to look at your parents and feel inspired to work hard and to achieve a little bit more than they did. And so hopefully I am showing my kids through my daily work and my daily interactions that this is not only a day job where I receive a paycheck, but it's really a lifestyle. We on the weekends go out, help serve food to the homeless, provide community service. And this is not something that we're doing for any external reason other than to truly be helpful to people in need. And so that becomes a part of your lifestyle. And when that becomes a part of your lifestyle, you want to pass that down to the next generation so that they are givers and not takers. And for me, that would make me feel very fulfilled as a mom, to know that, I didn't just bring these human beings into the world to be selfish, but to be givers. So for me, there are a lot of things that influence my decision to take on some of these great big challenges that come about every day. And don't get me wrong, the challenges are very real. And there are naysayers, and there are dissenters, and people that are not comfortable with the direction in which things are headed. And so I do know that there are battles to be fought, but for me, it's all worth it.
So looking back on your life, when do you recall first being thrust into a leadership position, and how did that experience go?
Probably in high school. Um, as a leadership position that I can really remember, in terms of being able to guide a group of people. I was on the track and field team in high school, and I was a member of the 4x800 relay. It was the anchor leg, likely because I was the fastest to run that part of the race. And I remember many times where we had very competitive races where a lot was on the line, like the county championship or an all-state meet. Um, Getting the group together and really helping the team to understand that we all had a part to play, and that we wouldn't all run the same exact times. Some of us would be faster, some of us would be slower, but we had to put our all into what we were bringing to the table, because for the second leg that was our slowest leg, she could rely on the third leg to pick up the slack so long as she did her part. And so I just remember having those conversations, and there were many races that we lost, and me having to have conversations about, it's just one race, but it's not our collective story. Let's get up, let's try again. Um, I think that was the first time I can remember leading, and I can remember um, other people around me that were my peers that were similarly situated in age range, um, leaning on me for guidance and for support in many ways. And so that experience really has influenced the way that I've led teams and that I continue to lead my team now. It's almost like recognizing that every single person has a part to play, and everybody's not going to be Michael Jordan. You have everybody's not LeBron. Those people score, those people are the star, but they can't do it without Pippen. They can't do it without Kyrie. Um, and so leaning into what are people bringing to the table that you can leverage as a strength, and help make them feel motivated to give their all, and then doing your part to get the job done.
How do you deal with someone that you see more potential in than they're demonstrating? How do you squeeze the most out of the members of your team as a leader?
Well, first and foremost, I don't give people work that they're not interested in and that I know that they cannot do. I think sometimes managers put things that are impossible on their employees' plates, and ultimately the employees fail, and that's very demotivating. So I do deep dive assessments. I actually, when I started my job at Starbucks, I gave my employees this assignment that I call the blue sky. And I asked them all to write me a document. And I didn't care if the document was a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document. Presentation didn't matter, but the content needed to be able to inform me, what are your hopes and dreams for your career? What are you good at? What do you want to learn? Et cetera. And so after really assessing and looking on paper at where do people see themselves and what do they want to do and how do they want to lean in, it really enabled me to be able to devise a strategy and a core plan that would be able to enable people to start to do the work in the way that they felt comfortable, in the way that they wanted to. Not to say that there weren't changes or adjustments that I had to make, but I think that level of insight is important when you're trying to motivate people that are not giving you their 100%. Oftentimes they're not giving you 100% because you're not listening to them, or you never gave them an opportunity to tell you what they wanted. You generally probably told them what you wanted. And it's got to be a two-way dialogue. And you have to incentivize people. I think that people are oftentimes, everyone's not incentivized by money either. Some people are incentivized by praise and recognition. Some people are incentivized by small things, extra vacation time. You'd just be really surprised what it takes for a person to tick. But for me, I really think that for me as a leader, the way that I've been able to get the most out of everybody is to really listen and understand, what do you want?
On the flip side, one of the greatest challenges of being a leader is sort of dealing with difficult people or difficult conversations. How do you go about dealing with those difficult conversations that have to be had as a leader?
With empathy. Most of the conversations that I have are difficult because I'm talking about topics that people do not want to discuss. I'm talking about race. I'm talking about gender. I'm talking about discrimination. I'm talking about inequity. People don't want to talk about that because, number one, they don't want to think that they were part of a system that mistreated others. Or number two, they don't want to take accountability or even own up to what part they played. And so for me, the way that I approach a lot of these conversations is through it's really through a different lenses. Number one, I like to curate conversations that have thought leaders from the outside of the organization because I think that it's almost like family. Like if you're at home with your family and you're discussing some tough topics, it can get heated, it can get loud, people get indignant, and you really look at the end of that conversation and you say, we didn't achieve anything. We didn't really, find a place of comfort. But it's almost like a therapist. When you bring somebody from the outside to talk about this topic in a way that provides thought leadership and insight that is providing perspective that you may not have thought of, you're almost more open-minded to understanding the nuance of the conversation. So I like to curate a lot of those courageous conversations with people from the outside to come in and help us really look at things neutrally. But then I also demand a level of respect from people that are having conversations internally where, I've said during some of the Courageous Conversation series that I have curated, that I start the conversations by saying, we're all going to respect one another. It's okay to have differing opinions, but when we start to cross that threshold and be disrespectful, that's when the conversation has to stop. So I think setting ground rules and boundaries by which to engage is very important because if those ground rules are not set, things can go to the left very quickly. So those are some of my tactics.
Okay. Tell us about one or two of your major successes from your career, things that you look back on and you're super proud of.
Well, I mean, I think I had a recent success a couple of weeks ago. There's been some media about Starbucks coming out and tying executive compensation to our inclusion and diversity goals. That is something that's very new, not only for Starbucks, but new in our industry. And that's a project that I spearheaded. And, I'm very proud of it because I think that it's pushing organizations to think about this work, not as volunteerism or a grassroots assignment, but as a core part of the way that we will evaluate our senior most leaders that run the company, hold them accountable for increasing, whether it's increasing hires that they bring on board or increasing the ability for people that are in-house to move up in a path that would show consistent progression that is equivalent to their white counterparts. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I was able to very quickly, I'm less than a year tenured at Starbucks. So very quickly influence a wide range of senior level executives, in addition to our board, who are made up of very, very successful executives from Nike, from Ulta Beauty, from Microsoft, from Apple, and the list goes on. Influence all of these stakeholders that this is the right direction and influence the comp committee to adopt this change as something that will be standard for the way to move forward. So, as a diversity practitioner, you really do have to use the power of influence to get a lot of the initiatives across the finish line. It's not that what we're trying to do is rocket science, but because there are so many stakeholders and because some of these initiatives are unpopular because they're taking people way outside of their comfort zone, it's really the power of influence that helps me to push things along. And so I'm proud of that.
Okay. What is one thing that you wish had turned out differently that you've worked on? And then how did you respond to that to sort of grow?
Oh, that's a great question. I wish a lot of things have worked out differently. I guess when I was at Edelman, running inclusion and diversity, I don't think that I had the ability to influence the organization to move as rapidly as I would have liked in terms of representation of diverse counselors on different pieces of business. I think that what I could have done differently was to create more of a holistic strategy plan versus trying to influence the company to do tactical work. I was a lot more junior in my career then. And so I think I approached the work thinking, if we do this one-off initiative, that'll be a good thing, right? So if we host a session, or if we, have a recruiting fair where we're, sourcing candidates in this one instance. And so there were just a lot of tactics that I were doing, almost like bandages to cover a wound, without a real strategy plan. And so if I could approach that job differently, I would have thought about it more 30,000 feet above the ground level, and looked up higher to understand that if there was a holistic strategy versus tactical parts of executional work, that we probably could have gotten a lot further, a lot faster. So, that's one of those lessons where you almost have to be on the planet for a certain number of years and have trial and error and wins and losses to understand the next time what to do differently. And that's one of the key lessons that I will tell people is it's not about making mistakes or failing forward. Like, that's fine. You have to make mistakes in order to grow. But if you keep making the same mistakes and you keep implementing the wrong things over and over without learning the grand lesson, then life will continue to present you with the same challenges. Life is almost like this interesting game where once you master the art of navigating through something that could take you down the wrong path, and you know how to see it clearly and how to pivot based on some of the experiences that you've had in the past, then life will start to give you different challenges. It won't present you with that same challenge. That's why you see, like, even in people's personal lives, I have girlfriends that are saying, oh, I keep dating. It's like I keep dating the same guy. It's like I keep getting the same guy over and over. And no matter what I do, I keep running the same thing. And it's like, okay, well, at some point, everybody is not the problem. You're the problem. You have to really think about, why are you attracting this energy into your life? And do a deep soul search to figure out, what can I begin to do differently if I want to see a different result? And so for me, those have been some of the greatest lessons from the mistakes that I've made, or the what you call failures in the workplace is what's the lesson? What did I do wrong? And then how do I not do it again?
So if someone said they wanted to be the next Nzinga Shaw, what would you tell him or her to do to start that trajectory?
I would tell them, don't do it. I would tell them to go live your own life. People ask me all the time, Kevin, they say, I want to be a diversity officer, or I want to have your career path. What do I do? And I say, you can't have my career path, and you can't have my life, and you can't have my journey or my story. All of those things belong to me. But what you can do is number one, define, why do you want to be a diversity officer? Like 9 times out of 10, when I ask people that question, they truly don't have a good answer. So define, why do you want to do this in the first place for yourself? Not because you're trying to get a good elevator speech, or you're trying to impress somebody, but like, really, when you're alone by yourself and no one's listening, why do you want to do this work? And then if you're able to come up with a good answer, then I think you have to prepare yourself by doing a number of things. I think for me, I prepared myself from an academic perspective and have studied across the disciplines at a range of institutions, at the collegiate level, at the graduate level, have certifications. I just got a certification in diversity and inclusion as recently as last month. So I'm always on this constant journey of being intellectually curious. But then I also think that you have to do a lot of reading. You have to understand what are best practices in your industry, and think very critically about, what's the missing piece. So yeah, all of these things have been solved, but like, what hasn't been solved that likely needs to? So for me, when I came to Starbucks, I was like, there's no accountability. Everybody's saying that they care about this work and they want to do it, but like, where's the accountability? Oh, I know how to solve it. I'm going to tie it to your compensation. There goes the accountability. So you have to like figure out how to be a problem solver if you want to be in my job and you want to have a career path like me. And then I think the last piece of advice is that you have to actually do this work in your real life. When no one's looking at my resume, when nobody knows my name, and I have on a baseball cap and a mask, and and I'm out there feeding the homeless on the weekends because people are being disproportionately impacted because of COVID. And I am, doing these free speaking engagements just to shed some light or impart a piece of wisdom to someone who's trying to do the same. Like, this is not because I'm putting this stuff on my resume. It's not because I'm talking about it because you asked, but I don't talk about this stuff. It's because I like to do it. It's because it makes me feel fulfilled. And so people need to start feeling fulfilled and start understanding and liking the work, and stop trying to create a career path for the sake of putting a piece of paper called a resume together, but decide, like, is this part of your life journey? Is this part of your mission? Don't try to be Zing Shaw. Don't try to create or recreate my life and my path. This is all a story that has a lot of layers, encompassed around loss. I lost my mom at the age of 16. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from a situation like that. I have, I've had ups and downs, wins, losses. So, it looks good on paper, but this is a collective life journey that certainly has had joy and pain. And so that's another thing. It's like, don't try to be somebody because you don't know you don't know what they had to do along their journey to get to that place. And you may not be ready for the pain that they had to experience to get there. Everything is not a shiny object.
I know how influential your parents were, and I know I've seen your library at your house. So are there any sort of books that you would recommend that you read as a younger person, or any books that you would just recommend in general for the folks listening today?
I have thousands of books. You know that. It's like, where do I even begin? I mean, a book that I read recently, The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois because I was just appointed to the board of Fisk University, and he is one of their most notable alumni. And, a lot of folks know him for his graduate work at Harvard, being a Black man in the 1800s to go to Harvard. And it sounds crazy, but he started at Fisk. And so there are some deep stories of the journey of Black people during some of the most tumultuous times in our history that I think are important stories to read, that will really just shed light on who you are and why it's important for you as an individual to continue on your journey. So I like books that are inspirational like that. A book that, let me think. What's a book that I'm going to read? I've gotten a couple of recommendations, but someone told me that I need to get a President Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. It's a memoir that he recently wrote. I have not read it yet, but I'm very intrigued to see what his story is. I've read his wife's book, Becoming, a couple of times, and I actually went to Michelle Obama's Becoming tour in Atlanta, and I loved that book in general, but I loved that she presented herself as a normal person who has a normal story and who has had some truly challenging experiences in her life, particularly around fertility. I think that, when the Obamas came into the White House, we saw Malia and Sasha, and they were just two cute young ladies. And you thought that this was a perfect all-American Black family, not recognizing that the Obamas had major fertility issues and had to go through in vitro fertilization for both of those children to come into the world. So I loved the audacity of Michelle's book and for her level of candor and her level of inspiration to let Black girls know that you can become a first lady. You can be in the White House. You can do anything that you want to do. And you can be Ivy League educated and all of these things, but you can also be a real person that has trauma as well. So yeah, those are a couple of the books that I feel good about.
So I have two more questions. One is, it sounds like you've been fluid in your career path. So if you had a student now that's on a campus at college and they say, at the age of 40, here is where I am going to be, what would you tell them?
If they tell me when they're in college where they're going to be when they're 40,
Yes.
I would say, oh, that's nice to hear. And then I would say, so much is going to change in your the age of 18 to 40. I mean, if I look at my life and look back on where I was as a student at Spelman College with no money in my pocket and a mom who had just died and a dad that didn't understand some of the issues that girls face as it relates to navigating dating or coming into myself as a woman. I mean, so many things that I didn't know about life. I didn't know about motherhood, and I now have 2 kids and one on the way. You know, I didn't know about what it meant to be a wife or anything. All of these things. I didn't know what it meant to hold a corporate job and, be in boardrooms with white men that would be pushing back on me. And I have to learn how to put on my thick skin and push back. And I would have never been able to see any of those things as a youngster on campus at the age of 18. So if, I would just encourage them and say, good, keep dreaming. Make sure you keep your eyes wide open, keep your ears open, and stay open-minded, really, because while you have these dreams for yourself, many things could happen along the way.
And I think that's important because a lot of people try to plot out their life and they don't understand that you have to be flexible because you never know what's going to be thrown your way. And changing your path does not mean you failed. You just have to take life as it presents itself and adapt and adjust. And so that's why I think that is an important question. And the last question I have for you is, what are you most proud of and what do you want your legacy to be?
I'm most proud of my children, hands down. Can't think about anything that makes me more proud than to be a mom to 2 great young spirits that are so lively and energetic and sweet and fun and crazy and all of these things. I just look at them and I can actually see my face in my son more so than my daughter, but I see a little bit of my personality in both of them, and they make me wake up in the morning and make me want to do all of this crazy stuff that we call careers. And so they keep me inspired. So what do I want to see? I want to see them thrive. I want to see them surpass what I've been able to do. I want them to go to better schools and I don't even want them to work at jobs. I want them to own their own companies. I want them to run their own businesses, be entrepreneurs, not have to work under duress or for someone else. I want them to have a better life than me, and I want them to always be givers and to know that as long as they give in the right way, that they'll always receive.
Well, this has been a great discussion. 1 o'clock is upon us and we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And as always, it's great to chat with you. And I think our young people and our young professionals and all that have listened in here today will take some good nuggets from this discussion, and it will help sort of impact their leadership journey as they go forth. So thank you very much. We appreciate you on behalf of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
All right. Have a good one and take care. Be safe.
Take care.
And welcome back to Atlanta.